May 1945. The war was ending, but on a remote Pacific island, terror reigned. Japanese civilians, fed propaganda of Allied brutality, hid in caves as British commandos approached. What happened next defied every expectation of war and would remain classified for decades. The women trembling in darkness had no idea that the soldiers entering weren't bringing death. They were bringing something that would shatter everything they'd been told to believe. 15th May 1945, 0600 hours. Okinawa Prefecture. The morning air hung thick with humidity and unspoken dread. Lieutenant James Harlow, a 29-year-old medic from Manchester, crouched behind a shattered stone wall, his medical kit pressed against his chest like a talisman. Around him, 12 men of the 3rd Commando Brigade waited in tense silence. They weren't here to fight, not today. Intelligence reports had been flooding in for weeks. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Japanese-held territories, they discovered something horrifying. Civilians were killing themselves rather than face capture. Mothers threw children from cliffs, families detonated grenades in their own shelters. The propaganda machine had convinced them that Allied soldiers were monsters who would torture, rape, and murder every Japanese citizen they encountered. "It's bloody madness," Corporal David Walsh muttered, adjusting his helmet. The 24-year-old from Liverpool had seen enough death to last 3 lifetimes. "They're terrified of us, and we're here to help them." Captain Richard Pemberton, leading the unit, studied the cave entrance 200 meters ahead. At 35, he'd commanded operations across Burma and Malaya, but nothing had prepared him for this peculiar mission. "Remember," he said quietly, his Yorkshire accent thick in the humid air, "we're not conquerors today. We're medical personnel. Leave your rifles. Bring your bandages." The statistics were devastating. In the past month alone, intelligence estimated that over 1,000 civilians had died by suicide on this island, more than had been killed in actual combat. Imperial Japanese propaganda had been ruthlessly effective. Leaflets, radio broadcasts, and orders from remaining Japanese officers all carried the same message. Death was preferable to Allied capture. But something had shifted in London. After liberating concentration camps in Europe, British command recognized the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in the Pacific. A classified directive had been issued, Operation Mercy. Medical teams would accompany frontline units specifically to treat civilian casualties and demonstrate Allied humanity. Harlow had volunteered immediately. His father had been a doctor in the slums of Manchester during the Depression. "Medicine doesn't have enemies," the old man had told him. "Only patience." Now, as Harlow checked his supplies for the 4th time, sulfur powder, morphine, bandages, penicillin, those words echoed in his mind. Inside the cave, the situation was desperate. 23 women and children huddled in the darkness, their faces gaunt from malnutrition. They'd been hiding for 17 days, surviving on rainwater collected in rusted tins and the last fragments of rice. Some were injured, shrapnel wounds from artillery, infected cuts, fever from typhoid. Michiko Tanaka, a 32-year-old schoolteacher, held her daughter close. The 6-year-old girl was burning with fever, her small body shaking. "They're coming," whispered an elderly woman nearby. "The demons are coming." Michiko had heard the stories. Every Japanese citizen had. Allied soldiers would desecrate bodies, torture prisoners, commit unspeakable acts. The radio broadcasts had been explicit. Military officers had distributed grenades to civilians with clear instructions: use them when the enemy arrives. Her hand trembled as she touched the cold metal of the grenade hidden beneath her tattered coat. One pull. That's all it would take. Better a quick death than what awaited them. Outside, Pemberton made his decision. "Harlow, you're up front with me. Walsh, translate the leaflets we prepared. The rest of you, form a perimeter but stay visible. No aggressive movements. We're walking in slowly, hands visible, medical insignia forward." They'd prepared Japanese language leaflets, crude translations certainly, but clear enough. "We are doctors. We will not harm you. We have medicine and food." The The commandos began their approach. 50 meters, 40, 30. Inside the cave, panic surged. A young woman began crying hysterically. An old man clutched his chest, his heart racing. Michiko's finger moved to the grenade pin. 20 meters. Harlow could see movement in the darkness now. Shapes, shadows. He'd treated wounded German soldiers in France, Japanese prisoners in Burma. He'd seen what war did to bodies. But this, treating terrified civilians who'd been taught to fear him, this was different. 10 meters. Now, Pemberton ordered. Harlow raised his medical kit high, the Red Cross clearly visible. He began speaking in broken Japanese, words they'd practiced. Isha desu, tasukemasu, tasukemashu. We are doctors. We will help. Let us help you. The commandos stopped at the cave entrance, unarmed, exposed, vulnerable. Inside, Michiko stared at the silhouettes. She'd expected demons. She saw men holding medical bags. Her hand released the grenade pin. Same day, 0645 hours. Silence stretched like piano wire, ready to snap. Harlow's heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to take cover, to prepare for attack. But he stood there, medical kit raised, completely defenseless. Inside the cave, Michiko's breath came in short, panicked gasps. The grenade lay beside her, still inactive. She hadn't pulled the pin. Her fingers had frozen at the last moment. Around her, the other women and children pressed deeper into the darkness, their terror palpable. Isha desu, Harlow repeated, his voice steadier than his nerves. Kusuri arimasu, tabemono arimasu. Medicine, food. Walsh stepped forward, holding the leaflets. His Japanese was marginally better. He'd spent 3 months in a POW camp and had learned fragments from guards. Kodomo tachi wo tasukemasu, byuki no kodomo. We help children, sick children. A small voice emerged from the darkness. Michiko's daughter, delirious with fever, called out, Okasan, mizu. Mother, water. Harlow recognized the word. Water. He slowly reached into his pack, moving deliberately, and withdrew his canteen. He placed it on the ground, pushed it forward with his boot, then stepped back. Take it, he said in English, then repeated in rough Japanese, Dozo, mizu. Minutes passed. Nothing moved except the wind rustling through shattered palm trees. Then a tiny hand emerged from the darkness. A child, perhaps 8 years old, eyes wide with terror and desperation. She grabbed the canteen and disappeared back into the cave. Pemberton exhaled slowly. First contact, no gunfire, no grenades. Progress. Harlow, show them the medical supplies. Slowly. The medic opened his kit, displaying its contents. Bandages wrapped in paper, glass vials of penicillin, packets of sulfur powder, morphine syringes. He held up each item, naming them in English, letting the women see they were medical supplies, not weapons. Inside, the elderly woman who'd spoken of demons now squinted at the items. She'd been a nurse before the war. She recognized medical equipment. Kusuri, she whispered. Medicine. Real medicine. But trust doesn't come easily when terror has been systematically cultivated. Japanese propaganda hadn't just warned of Allied brutality. It had described it in graphic detail. Leaflets dropped by Japanese planes showed cartoons of Allied soldiers with grotesque features, committing atrocities. Radio broadcasts featured fabricated testimonies of survivors describing torture. Michiko clutched her daughter, who was now drinking greedily from the canteen. The water was clean, fresh. Not poisoned, but that didn't mean safety. It's a trick, someone whispered. They want us to come out so they can... A scream interrupted her. A young woman in the back of the cave had collapsed, blood seeping through makeshift bandages on her leg, shrapnel wound, infected, festering. She'd been shot 3 days ago during an artillery barrage. The wound had turned gangrenous. The smell of rot reached Harlow's nostrils. He'd treated gangrene in field hospitals across Burma. Without immediate intervention, she had perhaps 2 days before sepsis killed her. Someone's badly injured in there, he told Pemberton. Gangrene, I'd stake my commission on it. The captain nodded. Can you treat it? If she comes out, or if they let me in. Your choice, Lieutenant. Harlow had served in combat zones for 3 years. He'd performed amputations under artillery fire, sutured wounds during firefights, extracted bullets while bombs fell around him. But walking unarmed into a cave full of terrified, indoctrinated civilians who'd been told he was a monster, that required a different kind of courage. He stood, removed his helmet, set down his rifle against Pemberton's orders earlier. Though they'd been advised to be unarmed, he'd kept it within reach and held only his medical kit. I'm going in, he said. James, Walsh started. That woman dies if I don't. Can't live with that. He walked forward, each step measured, deliberate. 5 meters to the cave entrance. 4, 3. He could see faces now, eyes reflecting terror. 2 meters. 1. He entered the darkness. Inside, 23 people pressed against the cave walls. Michiko's hand found the grenade again. One wrong move, one threatening gesture, and she'd detonate it. Kill the soldier, kill them all. Better than what she'd been taught to expect. Harlow's eyes adjusted. He saw the injured woman, her face grey, her leg black with infection. He knelt slowly, set his kit down, opened it. I'm going to help her, he said in English, then tried Japanese. Tasuke masu, kanojo wo. He withdrew sulfur powder, bandages, a scalpel. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound, debriding dead tissue. The woman screamed in pain. He had no time for anesthesia first. The infection was too advanced. The other women watched, frozen between terror and fascination. This allied soldier, this supposed monster, was performing surgery, saving a life. Harlow worked for 45 minutes. He drained the abscess, applied sulfur powder, administered penicillin, dressed the wound with clean bandages. British medicine, British hands, gentle and skilled. When he finished, the woman's breathing was steadier. She'd survive. He looked up at Michiko, at the other women, and said simply, more injured. 16th May 1945, 1200 hours. Word spread like wildfire across the island. Japanese civilians who'd been hiding in caves, bunkers and jungle clearings heard whispers. British soldiers weren't killing captives, they were healing them. Within 24 hours, Operation Mercy had treated 47 civilians. Harlow barely slept, moving from cave to cave, treating shrapnel wounds, malnutrition, typhoid, dysentery. Walsh and 3 other commandos with medical training worked alongside him. They'd transformed a bombed-out schoolhouse into a makeshift field hospital. But suspicion remained. Japanese military officers still hiding in the jungle sent messages. It's propaganda. They'll gain your trust, then slaughter you. Don't be fooled. Imperial intelligence had been monitoring British medical operations for weeks, and they were deeply troubled. Reports from other islands showed the same pattern. Allied medical treatment was undermining decades of propaganda. When civilians received genuine care instead of violence, everything the Empire had told them collapsed. A Japanese major, wounded and hiding in a bunker 2 kilometers away, read the reports with growing fury. They're using medicine as a weapon, he spat. More dangerous than bullets. He was right, though not in the way he meant. Compassion was indeed proving more powerful than violence. In the schoolhouse hospital, Michiko sat beside her daughter, now recovering from typhoid. Harlow had administered chloramphenicol, provided clean water, proper food. The girl's fever had broken. She'd survive. Michiko watched the British soldiers work. They moved with exhausted determination, treating every patient regardless of severity. No discrimination, no cruelty, just medicine. An elderly man with a shattered arm received morphine for pain and surgery to set the bones. A teenage boy with shrapnel in his back underwent extraction, Harlow's hands steady as he worked by lamplight. A pregnant woman, malnourished and dehydrated, received intravenous fluids and vitamin supplements. "Why are you doing this?" Michiko finally asked in halting English she'd learned in school. Harlow looked up from bandaging a child's burned hand. His face was drawn, exhausted, but his eyes held something she hadn't expected, genuine concern. "Because you need help," he said simply. "That's all that matters." "But we are enemies. You're civilians." "Civilians aren't enemies. They're just people caught in something they didn't choose." It was such a British response, understated, practical, fundamentally decent. No grand speeches, no propaganda, just a simple truth delivered with Manchester bluntness. Michiko felt something crack inside her. All the propaganda, all the fear, all the certainty that these men were demons. It crumbled. She began to cry, great heaving sobs of relief, grief and exhaustion. Other women joined her. The terror they'd carried for weeks, the anticipation of horror that never came, the realization that they'd nearly killed their own children to avoid a fate that was never going to happen. It all poured out. Harlow didn't fully understand the crying, but he understood trauma. He'd seen it in London during the Blitz, in soldiers after brutal combat, in refugees fleeing across Europe. He simply handed Michiko a clean cloth and said, "It's all right. You're safe now." By evening, 63 civilians had emerged from hiding. The schoolhouse hospital was overflowing. Pemberton had radioed for additional medical supplies, plasma, antibiotics, surgical equipment. A transport plane would arrive tomorrow with a full medical team. But Japanese military resistance hadn't ended. That night, a squad of holdout soldiers planned an attack on the hospital. Their logic was brutal, but consistent with imperial doctrine. If civilians saw Allied benevolence, the entire foundation of Japanese resistance would collapse. The hospital had to be destroyed. 10 soldiers, armed with rifles and grenades, moved through the darkness. Their target, the schoolhouse, filled with civilians receiving treatment from British medics. Walsh spotted them first. He'd been on perimeter guard, positioned on a rooftop with night vision equipment. Hostiles approaching northeast, 100 meters. Pemberton faced an impossible choice. Engage the Japanese soldiers, starting a firefight that would kill civilians, or try to negotiate with men who'd been trained to fight to the death. He chose a third option. "Harlow, bring every civilian outside, in front of the building. Now." "Sir?" "Trust me, move." Within minutes, 63 civilians stood between the hospital and the approaching Japanese soldiers. Michiko, her daughter, the elderly nurse, the woman Harlow had saved from gangrene, all of them forming a human shield, not to protect the British, to protect each other from their own military. The Japanese squad stopped 50 meters away, seeing their own people standing with the enemy. Their commander, a lieutenant who'd fought since Manchuria, stared in disbelief. Michiko stepped forward, calling out in Japanese, "They're doctors. They saved my daughter. They're healing us." Another woman, "They haven't hurt anyone." A man whose arm Harlow had set. "They gave us food and medicine." The Japanese lieutenant lowered his rifle slowly. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd been told, confronted a reality he couldn't deny. His own people defending their enemy. He turned and disappeared into the jungle. The attack never came. 2nd September, 1945. Tokyo Bay. Aboard the USS Missouri, Japan formally surrendered. The war was over, but for the men of Operation Mercy and the civilians they'd treated, the real impact was only beginning. In the months following, British medical teams continued operating across formerly Japanese-held territories. They treated over 12,000 civilians, trained local medical personnel, and established field hospitals that would later become permanent healthcare facilities. The mortality rate among Japanese civilians in British-occupied zones dropped by 74%, compared to areas where no organized medical intervention occurred. Harlow returned to Manchester in December 1945. He never spoke publicly about Operation Mercy. It remained classified until 1982. He became a GP in Moss Side, treating post-war communities with the same quiet competence he'd shown in that cave on Okinawa. But on his desk, he kept a photograph. Michiko and her daughter, smiling, healthy, standing outside the schoolhouse hospital. It had been taken by a military photographer documenting the operation. On the back, in careful English, Michiko had written, You gave us back our lives. We will never forget. For decades, Operation Mercy existed only in classified files. Military historians focused on battles, strategies, casualties. The story of medical teams winning hearts through compassion didn't fit conventional narratives of victory. Then in 1982, a historian named Dr. Elizabeth Harrow researched declassified documents at the Imperial War Museum. She discovered references to humanitarian medical operations in the Pacific. Following the trail, she found operation reports, medical logs, and testimonies. She interviewed 3 surviving commandos, including Walsh, now 61, and running a pub in Liverpool. It was the most important thing I did in the war, Walsh told her. More than any battle, we proved something fundamental, that even in total war, humanity could survive. That even when everything said we should be monsters, we could choose to be healers. Dr. Harrow published her findings in 1985. Operation Mercy: How British Medical Intervention Saved Thousands of Civilian Lives in the Pacific Theatre. The academic response was immediate. Here was evidence of something militaries had suspected but never quantified. Compassion was strategically valuable. Michiko Tanaka, now 72, was living in Tokyo when the book was published. She contacted Dr. Harrow, providing first-hand testimony. "I was ready to kill myself and my daughter," she said in an interview. "I believed completely that Allied soldiers were demons. But Lieutenant Harlow, Corporal Walsh, Captain Pemberton, they showed me that war doesn't have to destroy everything human. Even in the worst circumstances, people can choose kindness." The operation's legacy extended far beyond individual lives saved. British military doctrine began incorporating humanitarian medical intervention as a standard component of occupation strategies. The Geneva Conventions were amended to explicitly protect civilian medical facilities. NATO developed protocols for immediate medical response in conflict zones. But perhaps most significantly, Operation Mercy demonstrated something that pure military force never could. Winning a war isn't just about defeating enemy soldiers. It's about proving your values are worth fighting for. The Japanese lieutenant who'd planned to attack the hospital eventually surrendered 3 weeks after the main armistice. In his surrender statement, preserved in military archives, he wrote, "I could not fight men who chose mercy over vengeance. They defeated me not with bullets, but by showing that everything we'd been told about them was a lie." In 2015, on the 70th anniversary of Operation Mercy, a memorial was unveiled in Okinawa. It features a bronze statue of a British medic kneeling beside a Japanese civilian, medical kit open between them. Both figures look forward, not at each other, symbolizing shared future rather than divided past. Harlow had died in 1998, but his daughter attended the ceremony. She read his diary entries from May 1945. "Today, I treated people who feared me more than death itself. By the end, they trusted me, not because of speeches or promises, but because of bandages and medicine and basic human decency. If we can do that in war, we can do anything in peace." The operation saved approximately 12,000 civilian lives through direct medical intervention, but its deeper impact was incalculable. It proved that even in total war, even when propaganda has dehumanized the enemy, individual acts of compassion can break through. That medicine, applied with genuine care, speaks a language that transcends conflict. The Commandos who served in Operation Mercy rarely spoke of their service. They were British, after all. Modesty was reflexive. But when they did, they expressed the same sentiment. They'd been trained to fight, but they'd learned something more valuable, that healing was harder than hurting, required more courage, and ultimately achieved more. In the decades since, military historians have debated Operation Mercy's strategic significance. Some argue it was peripheral to overall victory. Others maintain it was central to successful post-war occupation and reconstruction. But for Michiko Tanaka, who lived until 2018, there was no debate. "They gave me back my daughter," she said in her final interview. "They gave me back myself. They gave me back faith that humans could be good, even when everything encouraged them to be terrible. That's not a small thing. That's everything. This is history they didn't teach us. The moments when courage meant compassion, not combat. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel and help us bring forgotten heroes back into the light. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that humanity can survive even the darkest times. What other untold stories from World War II should we explore? Tell us in the comments below. History isn't just about battles, it's about the choices we make when everything says to choose violence, and we choose mercy instead.